The 10-year-old girl I welcomed into my home, the orphan I swore before God to love and protect, tried to murder me. I can still see it as clearly as if it were happening right now. Her small frame standing on my front lawn, her face illuminated by the hellish orange glow of my house, burning to the ground. The home my Samuel and I had built, the sanctuary that held all my memories, was being devoured by flames. And Kendi, she wasn't screaming. She wasn't crying. She was watching the destruction with a calm, chilling stillness, a faint smile playing on her lips. I know that's a terrible thing to hear. And a part of you is probably thinking, Martha, how can you say that about a child who lost everything? Believe me, I ask myself that every single day. To understand how I ended up on my neighbor's porch, wrapped in a blanket and watching my life turn to ash, you have to go back with me. Go back to the beginning, just 2 short months before, when I thought I was performing an act of Christian charity. And for those of you coming back with me on this journey, hello, my darlings, my wise and beautiful queens. Thank you for being here. If you're new, please subscribe and press that notification bell because this is a story you need to hear from start to finish. It's a warning, it's a testimony, and it's the honest-to-God truth. 2 months ago, my life was as peaceful and orderly as my garden. I am Martha Johnson, 68 years old and a widow for 10 of them. My world was my home, a place filled with the lingering scent of my late husband Samuel's pipe tobacco and the phantom taste of his Sunday barbecue. It was my church, Bethel AME, where the gospel music filled the holes in my heart. It was my neighbors, good people who looked out for one another, especially the Williamses who lived right next door. David was a fine man, a mechanic who could coax any engine back to life. His wife, Sarah, was a nurse with a laugh so pure it could make my roses bloom brighter. They were the heart of our little block. And they had a daughter, Kendi, a quiet, watchful 10-year-old with big, solemn eyes. I'd often see her sitting on her porch, reading a book while the other kids played, seemingly content in her own little world. I'd wave, and she'd give me a small, shy wave back. I never imagined their laughter would be silenced so suddenly, so cruelly. The night it happened, I was woken by the glare of flashing lights, red and blue strobing across my bedroom walls. My heart hammered against my ribs as I saw the emergency vehicles surrounding the Williamses' house. There was no fire, no noise, just a grim, silent efficiency. By morning, the terrible news had settled over our street like a shroud. A faulty furnace, a carbon monoxide leak. David and Sarah were gone. The entire community mourned. But the sole survivor was Kendi. The paramedics said the gas had reached her room last. They called it a miracle. At the time, I believed them. Seeing her at the funeral, a tiny solitary figure in black, not shedding a single tear, I didn't see a strange child. I saw a soul in shock, a baby girl whose entire world had been ripped away. My heart didn't just break for her, it commanded me to act. I couldn't bear the thought of her being lost in the foster care system, passed from stranger to stranger. She was Sarah and David's child. She was one of us. So I did what I thought any decent, God-fearing woman would do. I made the call. I told them she had a home. With me. The day Kendi arrived, she carried all her worldly possessions in one small pink suitcase. The house was filled with the welcoming scent of freshly baked macaroni and cheese, her favorite. I showed her to the sunny guest room, chattering away to fill the heavy silence she brought with her. She said nothing. Her eyes just scanned the room, the floral bedspread, the window overlooking my garden. That night, I went to tuck her into bed. She was lying perfectly still, her hands folded over the blanket. I sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed her hair. "You get a good night's rest, baby," I whispered. She turned her head on the pillow and looked at me, her gaze clear and steady in the dim light. "It's very quiet in your house, Mrs. Johnson," she said, her voice flat without any emotion at all. "Well, it's just me here, honey," I said with a sad smile. "It's been quiet for a long time." She held my gaze for a moment longer. "It was quiet in my house that night, too," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "before the angels came. It got real quiet. And in that moment, a cold dread, sharp and unwelcome, pricked at my soul. I dismissed it as the rambling of a grieving child, but now I know it wasn't a memory. It was a boast. For a long moment, I just stood there in the doorway of that sunny yellow bedroom, the chill from her words creeping into my bones. But then my good sense, my Christian heart, took over. Lord, forgive me, I thought. This is a child in pain, a baby who has seen the face of death. Of course her words were strange. Of course she was disconnected. The poor thing was drowning in a sea of grief so deep I couldn't possibly imagine its depths. I pushed the unease down, chalking it up to the strangeness of the situation. I leaned down, kissed her forehead, and told her that the angels would watch over her here, too. Her skin was cool to the touch, and she didn't react at all. She simply closed her eyes, and I quietly shut the door, leaving the hall light on for her. The first week was quiet, unnaturally so. I had imagined a child's presence would fill the house with some new energy, maybe the sound of cartoons on the television or the scuff of sneakers on my polished wood floors. Instead, Kendi was like a ghost. A perfectly behaved, perfectly silent ghost. She made her bed every morning without being asked, the corners of the quilt turned down just so. She did her homework at the kitchen table as soon as she got home from school, her brow furrowed in concentration. She ate every meal I placed in front of her, chewing slowly and deliberately, and always said, "Thank you for the meal, Mrs. Johnson," in her soft, whispery voice. On the surface, she was the easiest child in the world. But her stillness was profoundly unsettling. She never asked to go outside and play. She never had friends over. Her favorite activity seemed to be sitting in the big armchair in the living room, Samuel's chair, and watching me. I would be in the kitchen, humming a hymn while I kneaded dough, and I would feel her eyes on me. I'd turn, and she would be sitting there, perfectly still, just watching. Not with curiosity, not with the affection of a child looking at her new guardian, but with a flat, analytical intensity, as if she were studying an interesting new species of insect. "Everything all right, baby?" I would ask, wiping my floury hands on my apron. "Yes, Mrs. Johnson," she would reply, a tiny, polite smile appearing for a moment before vanishing. "I'm fine." Then the small, strange things started to happen. Things you could easily explain away. Things that made me feel like I was losing my mind for even noticing. The first was the photograph of Samuel and me on my nightstand. I went to dust one morning and found it lying face down. I picked it up, my heart giving a little flutter of annoyance. I set it upright and didn't think much of it until it happened again 2 days later. This time, I knew I hadn't touched it. I asked Kendi, as gently as I could, "Honey, did you happen to be playing in my room and knock over this picture frame?" She looked at me with those wide, innocent eyes, a picture of wounded sincerity. "Oh, no, Mrs. Johnson. I would never go in your room without permission, and I would never touch your things. Especially not a picture of your husband." Her denial was so swift, so absolute, it made me feel ashamed. I apologized for asking, my cheeks burning with guilt. A week later, I went out to my rose garden. My Samuel had planted the magnificent crimson bush by the porch for our 25th anniversary. I called it Samuel's Pride, and its blooms were my pride and joy. That morning, I found the most perfect velvety red rose, the one I had been watching for days, snip from the stem. It wasn't on the ground nearby, it was gone. Just a clean, sharp cut on the branch. My heart sank. I knew Kendi had been the only one out on the porch that morning drawing in her sketchbook. When I asked her if she'd seen anyone near the garden, she shook her head, her expression one of deep sympathy. "It was such a beautiful flower," she said softly. "It's sad that something so beautiful can be destroyed so easily." The women at church, the sisters from the Mother's Board, all adored her. They saw a quiet, sweet, grieving orphan and a sainted sister, Martha Johnson, who had opened her home to her. They fussed over Kendi, bringing her little sweets and trinkets. Kendi would thank them with a shy, downward glance that they all took for modesty. But I started to see something else. I would catch her watching them when she thought I wasn't looking, and in her eyes I saw a flicker of something that was not shyness. It was a cold, dismissive contempt, as if their kindness was a foolish, tiresome game that she was forced to play along with. I was completely alone in my growing unease. To everyone else, our situation was a testament to faith and community. To me, it was beginning to feel like a performance, and I was the only one in the audience who suspected the lead actress was hiding a terrible secret. Every night, I would pray for the Lord to take the suspicion from my heart, to let me see this child as He saw her. But the silence that answered my prayers was as unnerving as the silence in my own home. I tried to push the dark thoughts away. I truly did. Every night on my knees, I'd ask the Lord to cleanse my heart of suspicion. "This is a child of yours, Lord," I'd pray, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles turned white. A grieving, wounded soul. Let me be your vessel of love for her. Don't let the devil plant seeds of doubt in my mind. I'd finish my prayers and feel a temporary peace, a renewed sense of purpose. I would resolve to try harder, to love bigger, to be the patient, caring guardian that Kendi deserved. And then another strange little incident would happen, and that cold, coiling serpent of fear would awaken in the pit of my stomach all over again. The peace I'd prayed for was shattered completely the day I found my music box broken. It was a beautiful, delicate thing made of cherry wood, a gift from Samuel for our first Christmas as a married couple. It sat on the mantelpiece, and when you opened the lid, a tiny ballerina would twirl to the soft, tinkling melody of "Our love is here to stay." It was, without a doubt, the most precious thing I owned. That afternoon, I went to dust the mantelpiece and found the lid slightly ajar. When I opened it fully, my breath caught in my throat. The ballerina was snapped clean off at the ankles. Her tiny porcelain body lay on the red velvet lining, her painted-on smile a cruel mockery. A wave of grief and anger, so hot and sharp it felt like a physical blow, washed over me. This was not an accident. It couldn't be. The box was too high up for a casual bump. This was deliberate. This was an execution. For the first time, I didn't bother with gentle questions. I found Kendi in her room reading on her bed, and I held the broken ballerina in my trembling palm. "Kendi, why?" I asked, my voice shaking with a hurt so deep it surprised me. "Why would you do this?" And then, for the very first time, I saw her cry. Her face, usually so placid and controlled, crumpled. Her lower lip trembled, and huge fat tears began to roll down her cheeks. I didn't do it," she wailed, her voice thick with anguish. "Why are you always blaming me for everything, Mrs. Johnson? I know you don't want me here. I know you hate me." The performance was so sudden, so utterly convincing, that it knocked the wind right out of me. She sobbed uncontrollably, her small body shaking. In an instant, the roles were reversed. I was no longer the victim of a cruel act of vandalism. I was the cruel accuser, a wicked old woman terrorizing a poor, heartbroken orphan. My anger evaporated, replaced by a bewildering wave of guilt and confusion. I found myself kneeling by her bed, shushing her, comforting her, apologizing for my accusation while the broken pieces of my most cherished memory lay in my pocket. As I held her and rocked her, a horrifying thought surfaced. She wasn't just breaking my things. She was breaking me. She began to work on my friendships next, with the precision of a surgeon. My dearest friend, Sister Gable from the church, came over for our weekly tea and conversation. Kendi, who usually stayed in her room when I had company, made a point of joining us. She was the perfect little angel, passing the sugar cookies and answering Mrs. Gable's questions with polite sweetness. And then she began to sow her poison so subtly that at first I didn't even notice. "Mrs. Johnson takes such wonderful care of me," she said, looking at my friend with her big, earnest eyes. "Sometimes she gets a little forgetful and I have to help her find her glasses, but she tries her best." Mrs. Gable gave me a sympathetic glance. A few minutes later, Kendi added, "She gets so sad sometimes. She cries in her room at night when she thinks I can't hear. I think she's just so lonely." By the time Mrs. Gable left, the warm, easy comfort between us had been replaced by a new, awkward distance. She patted my hand at the door and said, "Now, Martha, you be sure to call me if you're feeling overwhelmed. This is a lot for a woman your age to take on." I watched my oldest friend walk down the path, and I knew she hadn't seen me as her equal anymore. She saw a frail, forgetful, and emotionally unstable old woman, just as Kendi had painted me. The walls were closing in, and I realized Kendi was isolating me from my own life, brick by brick. That was the turning point. My intuition, the spirit deep inside me that had guided me through 68 years of life, was screaming. My rational mind, my loving heart, had been making excuses, but the evidence was becoming undeniable. I was not dealing with a grieving child. I was dealing with an enemy living under my own roof. And an enemy you cannot see is the most dangerous kind of all. That night, I knew what I had to do. It felt like a sin, a profound violation of trust. But my fear was now greater than my guilt. I waited until I heard the shower running in the upstairs bathroom. My hands were trembling, and my heart beat a frantic, guilty rhythm against my ribs. I walked into her room, that sunny yellow room that now felt like the coldest place on earth. It was, as always, meticulously neat. I started with the closet, then the dresser. My hands fumbled through the drawers, past neatly folded stacks of shirts and socks. I felt like a trespasser, a thief in my own home. I was about to give up, to chalk it all up to my own paranoia, when my fingers brushed against something hard and cool tucked beneath her sweaters at the very bottom of the last drawer. It was a small silver locket tarnished with age. I recognized it instantly. It was Sarah's. I had seen her wear it 100 times. My fingers shook as I fumbled with the clasp. I wasn't sure what I expected to find inside, a picture of David and Sarah perhaps, but when I finally pried it open, there were no tiny portraits. There was only a small folded square of brittle yellowed paper. The sound of the shower running upstairs was a ticking clock. each drop of water against the porcelain a countdown to discovery. My breath was trapped in my chest as I stared at the folded paper in my palm. It was old, the creases so deep they threatened to tear the fragile newsprint. My fingers, clumsy with fear, struggled to unfold it. I felt a profound sense of trespassing, of uncovering something I was never meant to see, a secret buried not just in a drawer, but in a past Kendi had carefully concealed. When I finally flattened the small rectangle under the dim light from the hallway, the words swam before my eyes. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle with age, from a small-town paper in Louisiana I'd never even heard of. The date on it was from 12 years ago. The headline was small, just a local tragedy. Family of 3 perishes in house fire. My blood ran cold. I forced myself to read the short article. It told the story of a young couple, the Devereaux, and their 5-year-old son, who had all died from smoke inhalation after a fire, believed to have been started by faulty wiring, swept through their home in the middle of the night. It was a terrible, heartbreaking story. But it was the last paragraph that made the world tilt on its axis. The article stated that the fire department had found one survivor. The couple's recently adopted daughter, a baby girl named Janie, had been found in her crib in a back bedroom, miraculously untouched by the smoke and flames. Janie, not Kendi. I sank back on my heels, the floorboards groaning under my weight. I read the clipping again, and then a third time, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern. A loving family is destroyed in a sudden, tragic accident. A single adopted daughter miraculously survives. Kendi hadn't just survived one family tragedy. She had survived 2. This clipping wasn't a sad memento. It was a trophy. A souvenir from the first time she had orchestrated death and walked away unscathed. Sarah's locket, her second adoptive mother's cherished possession, was being used as a trophy case for the murder of her first family. In that instant, all my guilt, all my confusion, all my Christian charity was burned away, replaced by a certainty so cold and sharp, it felt like a shard of ice in my heart. I was not losing my mind. I was not a cruel, suspicious old woman. I was a fool who had willingly invited a monster into my home, a monster who wore the face of a child. The water upstairs shut off. Panic seized me. My hands shook violently as I tried to refold the brittle paper along its original creases. It felt like I was trying to put a demon back in its box. I slipped the clipping back inside the locket, snapped the tarnished silver shut, and shoved it deep under the pile of sweaters. I smoothed the close, my breath coming in ragged gasps, praying it looked untouched. I stood up, my knees cracking in protest, and slipped out of the room, pulling the door quietly shut behind me. Not a moment too soon. The bathroom door opened, and Kendi emerged, wrapped in a fluffy white towel, her face scrubbed clean and innocent, her wet hair slicked back from her forehead. She stopped in the hallway and looked at me. A slow, curious smile spread across her face. "Are you all right, Mrs. Johnson?" she asked, her voice sweet as honey. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Her eyes, dark and knowing, held mine. She knew. She didn't know what I'd found. Not exactly, but she knew I had been in her room. The question was a challenge, a subtle tightening of the leash. And in that moment, our relationship shifted forever. The performance was over. We were now 2 opponents in a silent, deadly war, and the battleground was my home. I forced a weak smile, my lips feeling stiff and unnatural. "I'm fine, baby. Just an old woman's aches and pains." That night, sleep was an impossibility. I lay in my bed, staring into the darkness, my mind racing. I couldn't go to the police. What could I possibly tell them? That my adopted daughter, the sweet little orphan everyone pitied, had a newspaper clipping from a decade-old fire? They would think I was senile, cruel. Kendi's masterful performance with Mrs. Gable had already proven how easily she could turn people against me. She had laid the groundwork perfectly. I was utterly and completely alone. The old house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind in the eaves sounded like a footstep, a threat. I knew I couldn't go on pretending. I had to fight back. But to fight her, I had to survive her. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet cold on the wood floor. I crept to my bedroom door and took the small, straight-back chair from my vanity. With trembling hands, I wedged it under the brass doorknob. It was a flimsy barricade, a child's defense against the dark. But it was a start. It was a declaration. My home was no longer a place of peace. It was a fortress under siege, and I was the only soldier left to defend it. The morning light that streamed through my bedroom window felt different. It no longer promised the gentle start to a peaceful day. Instead, it illuminated the small wooden chair still wedged firmly under my doorknob, a stark, ugly symbol of my new reality. My home had become a battleground overnight, and the flimsy barricade was my trench. I took a deep, steadying breath, said a prayer for strength, not for love or patience anymore, but for raw, steely strength, and removed the chair. It was time to face the day. Breakfast was a silent, tense affair. I made oatmeal the same as I did 3 times a week, but my movements were different. I was no longer just a grandmotherly figure going through her morning routine. I was a watchman. I observed the way Kendi's spoon scraped the bowl, the way her eyes darted around the kitchen, cataloging everything. She was watching me just as I was watching her. The innocent, one-sided performance was over. Now, we were 2 actors on a stage, both acutely aware that the other was playing a part. The air in my kitchen, usually thick, with the comforting smells of cinnamon and coffee, was now thin and sharp with unspoken suspicion. I knew I couldn't live like this, jumping at shadows, barricading myself in my own bedroom. The fear was a poison, and if I let it fester, it would paralyze me. The newspaper clipping was my only weapon, my only proof that I wasn't going crazy. I needed more. I needed to know what happened to the baby named Janie and how she had become Kendi Williams. After I dropped Kendi off at the school bus, making sure to smile and wave like any loving guardian would, I didn't go back home. I drove straight to the downtown public library. Libraries had always been a place of comfort for me, a house of quiet order and knowledge. I walked past the fiction aisles, the familiar scent of old paper and binding glue calming my frayed nerves. I went to the reference section, to the rows of microfilm readers and computer terminals. I started with the clipping. I found the archives for the Louisiana Parish Chronicle and scrolled through the weeks and months after the fire. It was slow, painstaking work, and then I found it. A small follow-up piece, published about a month after the tragedy. It mentioned that the Devereaux baby, Janie, had been temporarily placed with a surviving relative, a great-aunt named Eloise Franklin, who lived in a town called Monroe. My heart hammered in my chest. I had a name. I had a place. It was the first real crack of light in a long, dark tunnel. I drove home feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. I was no longer just a victim in waiting. I was an investigator. I was going to uncover the truth piece by piece. But the moment I walked through my front door, I knew something was wrong. The house was too quiet, but it was more than that. Something was out of place. I walked into the living room, and my blood froze. The large, gilded frame portrait of my Samuel, the one that had hung over the fireplace for 30 years, was gone. In its place, tacked crudely to the wall, was a child's drawing. It was done in crayon with bright, garish colors. It depicted a house, a boxy, lopsided thing with orange and red flames licking out of the windows. Inside the house were two stick figures, a man and a woman with X's for eyes. Standing outside on the green lawn was a little girl with a big smiling face. Kendi walked into the room then, a juice box in her hand. She looked from the drawing to my face, her head tilted with an expression of perfect innocence. "I thought the wall looked a little sad and empty, Mrs. Johnson," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "So I made a new picture to cheer it up. Do you like it?" The audacity of it, the sheer, brazen cruelty took my breath away. She'd erased my husband and replaced him with her own horrific masterpiece. This was a declaration of war. All the fear, all the confusion coalesced into a single point of cold, hard rage. I turned to face her, and for the first time I didn't let her see me tremble. "Take it down," I said. My voice was low, devoid of any warmth. The innocent mask flickered. A flash of surprise, of anger crossed her face before it was replaced by a wounded pout. "But I made it for you." "I said," I repeated, my voice like ice, "take it down and put my husband's picture back where it belongs, right now." We stared at each other for a long, silent moment. The balance of power in the house had shifted, and we both knew it. The smiling child was gone, and in her place was a cold, calculating opponent. With a dramatic, put-upon sigh, she stood on her toes, plucked the drawing from the wall, and sullenly retrieved Samuel's portrait from where she had leaned it against the wall. As she put him back in his rightful place, I knew this was only the beginning. She was testing me, pushing me, enjoying the game, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she would not stop until she had erased every piece of my life, starting with Samuel and ending with me. And the silence that fell over the house after the confrontation over the portrait was heavier and more menacing than any argument could have been. The thin veneer of politeness we had been maintaining was gone, stripped away completely. Kendi was now sullen and withdrawn, her movements infused with a quiet, simmering anger. Doors would close just a little too loudly. A glass of milk would be accidentally knocked over onto the clean kitchen floor. These weren't the subtle, mind-bending games of before. This was a brute display of displeasure, the actions of a predator growing impatient with its prey. And I, in turn, moved through my own home with the quiet caution of a bomb disposal expert, knowing that the slightest misstep could set her off. My trip to Monroe to find Eloise Franklin was no longer just a good idea. It was a lifeline. It was the only way I could turn my chilling certainty into cold, hard proof that someone, anyone, would believe. But I couldn't just leave. I needed a story. A solid alibi that would get me out of the house for at least 2 days without raising Kendi's suspicions. My church, once again, was my salvation, though not in the way it is intended. I told Kendi, and several of the ladies on the phone, including a now distant Mrs. Gable, that I was attending a 2-day Women of Faith spiritual retreat at a sister church a few hours away. It was the perfect story. It was believable, it fit my character, and it gave me the cover I needed. I even arranged for my neighbor from across the street, a kind woman Kendi had not yet had the chance to charm or torment, to stay the one night I'd be gone. I spent the next 2 days preparing, my nerves stretched as taut as a violin string. I packed a small overnight bag for my retreat, making a show of it for Kendi, talking about the hymns we'd be singing and the sermons I was looking forward to. She watched me with those dark, unblinking eyes, offering no comment, her silence a heavy blanket in the room. I felt like a spy in my own life, every word a lie, every action a deception. I was becoming a person I didn't recognize, but survival has a way of stripping you down to the bare essentials. And right now, survival was all that mattered. The night before I was scheduled to leave, I was in the kitchen washing the last of the dinner dishes. My mind was 1,000 miles away, in a small town in Louisiana, rehearsing what I would say to a woman I'd never met. How do you ask someone if they remember a baby who may have killed their family? The whole idea was so monstrous, so insane that I almost lost my resolve. Then I heard it. A soft but distinct sound from the backyard. Psst. I turned off the kitchen light, my heart suddenly pounding against my ribs, and peered through the slats of the blinds over the sink. The yard was bathed in the pale glow of a half moon, and standing there, near the dark silhouette of the old oak tree, was Kendi. In her hand was the box of long wooden matches I kept in a drawer for lighting the gas stove. I watched, frozen in place, as she slid the box open, took out a single match, and struck it against the side. The flame flared to life, a sudden bright orange star in the darkness. It illuminated her face, and the expression she wore was not one of childish mischief or curiosity. It was one of intense, sober concentration. She held the matchstick, watching the flame consume the wood, her eyes wide and focused. Just before the fire reached her fingertips, she pursed her lips and blew it out with a gentle, deliberate puff of air. Psst! She struck another, and another, each time the same ritual. The brilliant flare of light, the unwavering analytical gaze, the final controlled puff of breath. She wasn't playing. She was learning. She was practicing. On the fourth match, as the flame danced before her, she lifted her head and her eyes seemed to lock directly onto the darkened kitchen window where she had to know I was standing. A slow, knowing smile crept onto her face, a terrifying sight in the flickering light. The message was as clear as if she had screamed it. "This is my new game, and you are going to be my opponent." My blood turned to ice. This wasn't about a past I had uncovered in a locket anymore. This was about my future, a future she was planning to end in fire and smoke. The retreat was no longer just a mission for truth. It was a race for my life. After a few more minutes, she came back inside, humming a little tune as if she'd just been enjoying the night air. Once I heard the television click on in the living room, I went, on trembling legs, to the match drawer. The new box I had bought just last week was nearly empty. A knot of pure terror tightened in my gut. Then I smelled it, faint but sharp and chemical. It was coming from the cabinet under the sink. My hand shook as I opened the cabinet door. Pushed behind the bottles of dish soap and countertop spray was a small red metal can. I'd never seen it before. I pulled it out. The label read, in bold black letters, lighter fluid. Kendi wasn't just practicing, she was preparing. The fire she had drawn in her crayon picture wasn't just a threat, it was a promise, and I was running out of time to stop her from keeping it. The morning of my retreat dawned gray and heavy, the sky the color of ash. There was no sleep-filled fog in my mind, only the cold, sharp clarity of a person walking toward a cliff's edge. The image of the lighter fluid can was burned into my memory, a bright red warning sign. I moved with a deliberate calm I did not feel, packing my bag, making coffee, calling out a cheerful, "Good morning," to Kendi when she came downstairs. The charade was exhausting, but necessary. Every normal action was a piece of camouflage, hiding the frantic race of my heart. Mrs. Peterson, my neighbor from across the street, arrived right on time, a kind, bustling woman with a smile that didn't know the darkness it was about to be left alone with. I gave her the rundown: Kendi's bedtime, the number for the pizza place, the location of the extra blankets. It felt like a monumental betrayal, leaving this good woman in the path of a storm she couldn't even see. "You have a blessed time now, Martha," she said, patting my arm. "Don't you worry about a thing." I looked at Kendi, who was standing in the doorway, the picture of a perfect, shy child. She gave me a small wave. "Bye, Mrs. Johnson. I'll be good." The words were a promise, but the look in her eyes was a threat. I hugged Mrs. Peterson, forcing a smile onto my face as I walked to my car. "I know you will be, honey," I called back. Every step away from my house felt like I was walking away from a ticking bomb, leaving someone else to hear the explosion. The drive was long and silent. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of gray asphalt under a gray sky. I watched the familiar scenery of my own town give way to unfamiliar woods and fields. With each mile that passed, I felt more alone, more unmoored from the life I knew. This was a fool's errand, I thought for a moment. I was an old woman chasing a ghost from a 12-year-old newspaper clipping. What did I really expect to find? But then the image of Kendi's face, lit by the flare of a match, would flash in my mind and my hands would tighten on the steering wheel. I wasn't chasing a ghost. I was hunting a monster. I arrived in Monroe in the early afternoon. It was smaller than my town and the air felt heavier somehow. I found the parish courthouse, a sleepy-looking building with columns out front, and spent an hour scrolling through public records on a dusty computer terminal until I found her. Eloise Franklin. There was an address. It was on the other side of town, in a neighborhood of small, tired-looking houses with chain-link fences and peeling paint. My car was the only one on the street that didn't look like it was 20 years old. I parked in front of a little blue house, smaller than the rest, with a garden that was completely overgrown with weeds. For a long moment, I just sat there, my car engine ticking as it cooled. This was it. The entire desperate plan hinged on the woman inside this house. I took a deep breath, got out of the car, and walked up the cracked concrete path. I knocked on the door. I could hear a television playing inside, but for a full minute there was no other sound. I was about to knock again when the lock clicked and the door opened a few inches, stopped by a tarnished brass chain. An eye, cloudy with age and suspicion, peered out at me. "What do you want?" a woman's voice rasped. "Are you Mrs. Eloise Franklin?" I asked, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. "Maybe. Who's asking?" I had to choose my words carefully. "My name is Martha Johnson. I'm doing some family research. I was a very distant relative of the Devereaux family. The ones who lived here in Monroe many years ago. I was so sorry to hear about the fire." At the name Devereaux, the woman's posture changed. The suspicion in her eye was joined by a flicker of something else, a deep ancient pain. "That's old history," she said, her voice flat. "Nothing to talk about. You're wasting your time." She started to close the door. Panic surged through me. "Please," I said, my voice louder than I intended. "Please don't. It's about the child. It's about Janie." The door froze. The cloudy eye widened, and for the first time I could see the color of her iris, a pale, washed-out blue. The pain in her expression was suddenly eclipsed by a new emotion, one I recognized with sickening familiarity: fear. A raw, bone-deep terror that had clearly been living with her for a very long time. The brass chain rattled as she fumbled with the lock. The door creaked open. Eloise Franklin was a tiny bird-like woman, her skin a road map of wrinkles, her shoulders hunched as if carrying an immense weight. She looked past me, her eyes darting up and down the empty street as if she were expecting to see a demon standing there. When she finally looked at me, her voice was a harsh, terrified whisper. "You better get inside. Right now. And you better tell me how in God's name you know that name." Eloise Franklin's house smelled of dust and fear. She bolted the door behind me, her movements quick and furtive, and led me into a small, cluttered living room where the curtains were drawn tight against the afternoon light. The air was thick with the weight of a secret kept for 12 long years. I sat on the edge of a plastic-covered sofa and told her everything. I spoke of the Williamses, of the carbon monoxide, of my decision to take Kendi in. I described the broken music box, the mind games, the lies. And finally, my voice dropping to a whisper, I told her about the locket and the newspaper clipping hidden inside. As I spoke, the fear on Eloise's face slowly melted away, replaced by a look of profound, weary sadness. She nodded, not in surprise, but in grim confirmation. It was as if she were listening to a prophecy she had been dreading for over a decade finally come to pass. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, her gaze fixed on the floral pattern of her worn-out carpet. "I knew it," she finally rasped, her voice brittle as dried leaves. "I knew that child was born with no soul." She told me her story then, how she took in the baby, Janie, after the fire, thinking she was a miracle. But the baby was wrong. She never cried, never cooed. She would just lie in her crib for hours, her dark eyes open, watching, studying. Strange, cruel things started to happen. Neighbors' cats would go missing. She once found a robin on her doorstep, its wings neatly and deliberately torn from its body. The Lord forgive me. I was terrified of a baby. Eloise confessed, her voice trembling. The final straw was my canary, Petey. He was a sweet little thing, always singing. One morning I found his cage empty. I looked everywhere, and then I looked in her toy box. He was in there, buried under her building blocks. His little neck had been snapped. She wasn't even 2 years old yet. Eloise knew then, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the fire that killed the Devereaux and their son had been no accident. But who would believe her? Who would believe that a baby was a monster? She did the only thing she could to save herself. She gave Janie back to the system, claiming her health was too poor to care for a child. She begged them to find a family far away in another state. "I've prayed every night for 12 years, she said, tears finally welling in her cloudy eyes. "I've prayed for the souls of whatever family ended up with her." "Is there any proof?" I asked, my voice urgent. "Anything I can show the police to make them believe me?" Eloise's eyes lit with a grim fire. "They said the fire was electrical, but they never found the exact cause," she said. She got up and went to an old locked cedar chest in the corner of the room. She fumbled with a key and opened it. The scent of mothballs filled the air. She reached inside and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in yellowed cloth. "But I found something they missed. I went back to the house before they tore it down, you see, looking for, I don't know what. Peace, maybe." She unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a melted scorched smoke detector. "This was from the hallway right outside the baby's room," she said, her voice hard. "I found it in the ashes. Look." She turned it over. The back casing where the battery should have been was open and it was empty. The fire started in her parents' bedroom at the other end of the house. The one detector that was closest to her, the one that should have been screaming the loudest. It was silent. This was it, the proof, the cold hard evidence that could finally end the nightmare. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was getting late. I had to get back. Mrs. Peterson was still in that house. The drive back was a blur of headlights and prayers. I clutched the melted smoke detector, wrapped in its cloth on the passenger seat beside me like a holy relic. I called Mrs. Peterson's phone again and again, but it went straight to voicemail every time. A cold, sharp panic began to claw its way up my throat. As I turned onto my own street, my worst fears were realized. Flashing lights, red and blue, were painting the dark houses in chaotic, terrifying strokes. An ambulance and a police car were parked directly in front of my home. I slammed the car into park and ran, my old bones screaming in protest. A paramedic was helping Mrs. Peterson into the back of the ambulance. She was alive, thank God, sitting up and breathing, but her face was pale. A police officer intercepted me before I could reach her. "Ma'am, you need to stay back." "This is my house," I cried. "I am Martha Johnson. Is she all right? What happened?" "We got a call about a possible gas leak," the officer explained, his voice calm and steady. "The woman inside, Mrs. Peterson, said she smelled gas and felt dizzy. She went to check the furnace in the basement and found the pilot light was out and the main valve was wide open. She called 911 just in time. The house was filling up." He gestured with his head toward the back of his patrol car. "The little girl was asleep in her room, said she didn't smell a thing. And there she was, Kendi, sitting in the back seat of the police car, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, playing the part of the traumatized near victim to perfection. She was trying a new method, quieter and more subtle than fire. When she saw me, her eyes widened and she put on a brilliant show of relief and fear. But it was too late. The game was over. I walked past the officer, my steps firm and sure. I went straight to the sergeant who seemed to be in charge. My voice did not shake. "My name is Martha Johnson," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "This is my house. And that child in your car is not a victim. She is a predator." I told him everything. The whole story from the moment Kendi moved in to the chilling discovery in the locket. And then I placed the grimy cloth-wrapped bundle in his hand. "This is a smoke detector from a house fire in Monroe, Louisiana, 12 years ago," I said, my voice ringing with the clarity of truth. "A fire that killed her first adoptive family. The batteries were removed. Tonight she tried to use gas. I suggest you check her fingertips for the grease from the gas valve in my basement." The sergeant looked from the scorched piece of plastic in his hand to me, and then to the small, innocent-looking child in his car. He walked over to the car and opened the back door. As Kendi looked up, she saw the melted smoke detector in his hand, and she saw the cold, righteous fury on my face. And in that moment, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. The look she gave me was not one of a scared child. It was a look of pure, undiluted hatred, and everyone saw it. It's quiet in my house now. A few weeks have passed. Kendi is gone, placed in a secure juvenile facility where she can't harm anyone else. The evidence was undeniable. My home is my own again. The silence is no longer menacing. It's peaceful. The battle is over. I am scarred, I am changed, but I am still here. I learned that evil can wear the most innocent of faces, but I also learned that the truth, when armed with faith and a righteous fury, is a weapon that no monster can defeat.